Please welcome our panellists, Senior Portfolio Manager and Managing Director of Tudor Investment Corporation, Ulrike Hoffmann-Bochadi. Partner and Chief Strategist of Clock Tower Group, Marco Papic. Founding Managing Partner of Qiming Venture Partners, Gary Reichel. Global Director of Tech Policy Research at Trivium China, Kendra Schaefer. And our moderator, Editorial Director of Bloomberg New Economy, Eric Schatzker.
Good afternoon, everyone. This begins the final portion of our program here on day 3 at the New Economy Forum. This is called the Geopolitics of Technology. I need to set the stage. We all know that trouble has been brewing between the United States and China over access to technology and intellectual property for years. Then, on October the 7th, the Biden administration raised the ante by barring American companies from exporting to China any software, equipment, or IP used in advanced computing chips and supercomputers. The new measures also barred U.S. persons from working for Chinese chip companies without a license from the U.S. government. The Commerce Department framed the export controls in national security terms, and I quote directly, "These items and capabilities are used by the People's Republic of China to produce advanced military systems, including weapons of mass destruction, improve the speed and accuracy of its military decision-making, planning, and logistics, as well as of its autonomous military systems, and commit human rights abuses." Folks, I want to know what you think. So it's time for another poll. Please pull out your phones and respond, if you would, to the following question. The recent U.S. ban on technology exports to China was A, necessary to maintain the West's dominance in semiconductors. This poll should be coming up. Poll. You guys see it on your phones? If you see it on your phone, there we go. A, necessary to maintain the West's dominance in semiconductors. B, just punishment for years of intellectual property theft. C, a thinly disguised attack on Chinese industry. D, the first salvo in a new Cold War. So, folks, while you answer that poll, I'm going to put the same question to our panelists. The ban on technology exports to China was what, Kendra?
E, all of the above.
Aha.
Is the answer.
That's not an option. You have to choose one. That's why these polls are devilishly difficult to answer.
Yeah, well, let me actually, I don't think my opinion necessarily matters. I mean, what's really interesting here is the stark divergence between the way that China perceives the semiconductor ban versus how the Biden administration is framing that ban, right? When we look at the Biden administration's national security strategy, he framed the administration's approach to China as an approach of responsible competition. Right. And by responsible, he meant not kicking off either a hot or a cold war as he engaged in competition with the country. However, that is not how this is being perceived in Beijing. Right. Beijing's policies, its domestic policies, particularly in terms of domestic development and food security, particularly in terms of domestic development and climate change and climate technology, in terms of the digital economy, are all predicated on access to AI. And so from Beijing's perspective, right, those bans represent not responsible competition, but an existential threat.
A stranglehold.
A stranglehold, exactly. And so, I think one of the critical risks here with these export controls is that China calibrates its response based on the perceived threat, which is existential. And so I think that's one of the factors raising the uncertainty and the factors raising the risk for the international community.
Gary, E is not an option.
So I'm going to go to F. No, I would say it's necessary and sufficient. So, and it's necessary because of the number of the items you have up here. There had been intellectual property misappropriation. There was not an open market for a large amount of the volume in China. I think that the sufficient part is important because this was not a ban. And I think that that's really important to understand. This is a ban and a restriction on a very, very small percentage of the highest end semiconductor chips and technologies. It's also does not prohibit the development of software for more advanced geometries. It's a combination. So actually, remarkably for the U.S., which usually uses a hammer, this is a pretty nuanced policy that I think takes some time to understand what the exact repercussions are.
Marco.
I mean, I think it's A, if I have to pick one of these four. But what's interesting to me is that there isn't anything about U.S. domestic politics on it. This clearly satisfies a condition in the U.S. that there's only two truths in American politics, which is babies are cute and China is evil. And it satisfies that part of it as well. I think there's a motivation here. I think American policymakers have decided that semiconductors are critical for the future. I'm not sure that's the truth, in fact. Ukrainian war, for example, is not being fought with anything below 40 nanometer chip, as an example. And so I'm not really sure that A is necessary, but I think it's A plus US domestic politics.
Ulrike.
Yeah, I don't know whether as an investor I have enough knowledge, political acumen to decide, but what I can do is infer from the impact of the ban, the potential intention. And what I would say is that this ban, maybe contrary to what you were saying, Gary, is the Sputnik moment for China. This goes right at the heart of what Made in China 2025 was set out to do. And these are not my words. Those are the words of Xi Jinping when he toured one of the leading flash manufacturers in Wuhan, YMTC, in 2018. And he said at the time, he compared the importance of the semiconductor industry that Marco just mentioned to the importance of the human heart. And he said, it doesn't matter how big you are, if your heart isn't strong enough, you're not really strong. And so what this ban now does is impacting the Chinese domestic memory industry significantly. I mean, if you look at the economic impact, it could be easily up to $20 billion between memory and then also high-performance computing, fabless, and foundry. So I think there's a significant impact that China will experience from this ban.
So I think that there will be impact, but the thing that you have to realize, China blew up $50 billion of investment in two semiconductor groups in the last 2 years, Wuhan Semiconductor and Tsinghua Group. Those were self-inflicted wounds. So I still think the self-inflicted wounds, Made in China 2025, wasn't the greatest idea to publish that in 2016. And they weren't ready for this. And again, the US could have taken the annihilation approach and really hammered them. And they chose not to. That was a very conscious choice not to do that. I think China, with the corruption in semiconductor investments and the things that they're going through, I think they've set themselves back more than this particular program will set them back.
Shall we see what the audience thinks and reveal the results of our poll? There we go.
There we go. Can I actually follow on a little bit? Because I think it's actually quite interesting. We conflate the idea that advancement, that kneecapping China's semiconductor industry, the hardware industry, is actually the same as kneecapping China's AI development. I don't actually know if those two things are the same, right? I mean, if you were going to ask about the results of the export ban or the export restrictions, I would say, will it kneecap China's ability to manufacture and produce? And you're right. I think they're very narrow, actually. I think BIS, from everything I've read, went way out of its way to keep those restrictions narrow as far as they're concerned. But will it kneecap manufacturing capacity? Absolutely, no question. Everything I've heard from companies, we've heard from companies in Beijing have said this is going to be disastrous, particularly in the case that the U.S. is able to convince allied nations like Japan, like the Netherlands, like Taiwan, like South Korea to get on board. But does that mean that China cannot then develop better algorithms that use legacy chips? Does it mean that they cannot leverage the fact that they are one of the world's largest producers of data by volume, right? AI needs data. China is arguably way ahead of the United States on the collection of data, on government data infrastructure, on data policy. So, it's not just about the hardware, and I think those are two separate issues.
I need to jump in to say two things. The first is that we tried to pin down the Japanese economy minister, Nishimura, here on Tuesday on that very subject, and he refused to be pinned down, so that may tell you something. The second thing I think is important to talk about is this nanometer issue. I think it was you, Marco, who said nanometers. I'm guessing, and to sort of play on words, if you will, that to most people in the audience, nanometers are as good as Chinese. What are we talking about here? The export controls are very specific to your point, Gary, about what can no longer be sold to China. Logic chips based on circuit widths of 16 nanometers or less, DRAM chips of 18 nanometer half pitch or less, and NAND flash memory chips with 128 layers or more. I know a little bit about semiconductors, but most of that doesn't make any sense to me. Help us make sense of it.
Me?
You.
Well, first of all, I'm the geopolitical guy here on this panel, so the wrong person to talk to about chips. But I will say this, nanometers, schnanometers. Why? And again, look, China has pivoted away from TMT sector on its own. As Gary's saying, they've kneecapped a number of different firms in the semiconductor space and also in the TMT sector. They've already made a decision since, I think, 2020 to shift towards hard tech and focus on a German economic growth model. This is very clear. There's this emphasis on Mittelstand, on the little giants, on hardware. And I think correctly. I mean, look, what's the nanometer size of a chip that Germany produces? Oh, yeah, that's right. Germany does not produce any semiconductors. Germany does not produce smartphones. And yet, if they wanted to, within 2 years, they would be able to produce a military that would crush everything before them. I mean, if anybody has any doubts, read some history. What am I getting at? I'm getting at the fact that the United States of America has in some ways decided to make this the topic of competition, the way that Gary, Eric, and I have decided before coming here to compete on who's going to have the more ridiculous socks. Right? But it's a little bit random, in my view. Yeah, AI is going to be important in 10 years. I get it. But you know what it's not important about? Today. As I said, the war in Ukraine is being fought with weapons from the 90s. HIMARS, javelins. They weren't developed 5 years ago. They were developed decades ago. And so China's going to be fine. Not only are their policymakers focusing already on non-TMT, non-AI, they're pivoting away from the 2016 published 2025 policy. They're beyond that. They've figured out what's happening. Two, I'm not sure it's going to be critical in the true measure of geopolitical power. You can be an extremely sophisticated regional hegemon without being able to produce 5 nanometer chips or AI. Again, just ask Germany.
I know I was being a little bit unfair to you, Marco, because you're not a semiconductor expert. The closest person to being a semiconductor expert on this panel might be you, Ulrika. This is something you look at very closely. You invest in large cap technology companies. You look at Tokyo Electron. You look at Applied Materials. You know the relative strengths of each of these companies, but most importantly, you know what technological advantage it is that they have. So what, again, going back to the nanometer question, what is and what isn't included in this export control, or as some people prefer to call it, sanction?
Yeah, there are really two elements to it. One is, you mentioned, is the AI chips, and that was the first part of the ban. That mainly for US company affected, NVIDIA and AMD, and probably we're talking about $2.5 billion in revenue that is at stake there. And then the second part of the ban that's actually economically much more meaningful is the ban on US equipment into China, into the domestic Chinese semiconductor companies. And that's where I see a real economic impact, because if you look at a company like, for instance, YMTC, that had admittedly closed or come closer to some of the NAND products from other countries like South Korea, the US, and Taiwan, for those businesses, not being able to receive US equipment and also parts and maintenance is going to be close to existential. So I think if we're sitting here a year from now, think YMTC, and also there's another advanced foundry company, SMIC, that came out with a 7-nanometer chip based, going back to the nanometer discussion. Those were maybe 2 milestones that the US looked at and said, well, this is probably more than we expected, and said, no longer can we ship this US equipment. And that's a much bigger economic hit, even for the US. So for China, it questions the future of their memory industry, but also for the US, it has close to over $7 billion impact in terms of annual revenue for these US companies no longer being able to export.
Now, when you say this is potentially an existential problem for these would-be Chinese chip makers or equipment makers, does that mean they become unprofitable, or that revenue goes to zero, or they're out of business because they don't have access to the advanced chip-making tools they require?
Yeah, I think the revenue will be significantly impacted, and with that, obviously, operating profits as well. I mean, it's difficult to guess what they can get access to domestically, but it's going to be very small.
Can I jump in as well?
Yeah. Sorry, so just one statistic, though. 7-nanometer and lower account for 5% of chip revenues worldwide. So what we are not talking about the vast majority of the foundry chip revenue for the Chinese fabs. For U.S. equipment suppliers, there's a little more constraint, as Enrique said, but in terms of revenue from the Chinese manufacturers themselves, very, very few of them have any material exposure to anything under the 14, 16 nanometer range.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also, you raised talent was also the issue, right? I mean, there's this restriction on people as well. A couple of statistics on that point. Chinese officials have essentially said, the Chinese labor officials have essentially said that there's currently a 300,000 person shortfall in the semiconductor industry, and they're graduating 30,000 semiconductor talents a year. So even if everything remains exactly as is, you're still looking at a 10-year gap in talent in the industry, and it won't remain exactly as is. I mean, you'll see probably a spike. I think the projection is that talent needed by 2025 will hit around 600,000 people. So, the restriction on import of just human capital is also a serious problem, I think.
I do want to remind everybody that there's an iPad right here. That means you can submit questions via your phone, and there is one here that I'd like to address right now. We've heard the word existential 3 times, once from Kendra, once from Ulrike, and then I repeated it. Existential is a big word.
It's a big word.
If the Chinese do, as you say, perceive this in existential terms, how are they going to respond?
If that's the million-dollar question. The problem, in short, right now is that the only responses that China has been kicking around are also foot bullets for China. They cause as much pain to China, or a significant amount of pain to China, as they may cause to the US. And those include the following things that we've, again, heard discussed. There's been no decision. And I also think, just to underscore the point, that the party has not decided. I don't think a decision has been made. But we are seeing policy advisors and policymakers kick around a bunch of potential options. One of the options we've heard raised is, China does, I think, something like 90%, 80% of the world's rare earth, element processing.
This is the stuff critical to the green transition, to battery production, to electric vehicles.
Yes. And so they might restrict, export of those processed minerals to the United States. That was one option. They've kind of done it before in 2010 in a dispute with Japan, so that's why that's being raised. The other potential is to use the anti-foreign sanctions law, to use potentially the export control law, to use some kind of blocking on companies, and something that doesn't get raised but that I think is a potential response vector is data, right? You want to talk about the 2 battlegrounds in geopolitical tech. Battleground number 1 is chips. Battleground number 2 is data, right? And cross-border data flows and cross-border data transfers. So China just recently released, an export control regime for data. Companies can now, it used to be that companies had to keep restricted data within China. Now there's a pathway through which they can apply to the internet regulators to get that data out. In the provisions, basically what happens is if you're exporting data from China and you get a license to do that, that license is valid for 2 years, but it gets reviewed in the case of, and this is right there in the rules, a change in the geopolitical environment between the two countries. So there's the potential that companies in China, maybe American companies based in China, trying to get their machine learning data back to their AIs in the US could be denied access from doing that. But all of those things, anti-foreign sanctions, export controls, data blocking, rare earth exports, cause pain to China. They are still very interested in getting foreign direct investment. They want foreign companies over there. They want that investment. And so making it, zero COVID is bad enough, making it more unpalatable, more uncertain, more dangerous to do business there is also not ideal. So what we heard at the 20th Party Congress was Xi Jinping slip in a mention that he might be working on a bigger policy toolkit for dealing with these kind of sanctions and these kind of export controls. And so that's what I expect we'll see.
Ulrika.
Yeah, I just wanted to qualify existential a little bit. So this is this was directed at the Chinese domestic memory industry in particular.
I realize, and I think everybody got it.
But potentially, China could also think, why don't I just change the game? Why don't I just play this game? I go to the next level of this game, which is quantum computing. Obviously, China has invested heavily, $15 billion. The US, relatively small amount of $2 billion in the CHIPS Act. So that could be one potential play. And I think the other thing just to realize, though, is we've talked a lot about the technological leverage that the US has over China. But if you look at the economic leverage that China has over the US, that actually is larger just with Apple alone than the economic impact from these sanctions on China. Apple has, I think, 74 billion in revenue from China, and close to 40% of its suppliers are located in China. So there is a good economic systems of checks and balances in place that I hope will ultimately lead to a more constructive dialogue around data and AI.
The word existential, to me, is 1941, right? U.S. banned export of oil to Japan. That was existential, so they bombed Pearl Harbor. Banning export of data as a retaliation to this seems to me like falls wildly short of existential. And so what I would say is over the next 12 months, we'll see. I would bet on the side that there will be no retaliation. When they did when they went after rare earths in 2011, they actually lost the 90% edge. It went down significantly. And so I think China has learned from this. The other issue is you don't want to mess with the green tech revolution. That will anger the Europeans, who are an important wedge player for China over the next decade. And I think China will be very careful on that front. So I would take the other side, because it's fun. And I would say there will be no retaliation whatsoever because it's not existential. And because, as I said earlier, I think the Chinese policymakers have pivoted from many of their hopes and dreams of 2025. The other thing I would say is, Gary pointed out it was very targeted to a specific level of sophistication of chips. And then you mentioned, Eric, that the Japanese, of course, minister didn't want to reveal what they were going to do. The two are connected. Yeah, I don't think the U.S., out of magnanimity, decided to be very specific. I think there's an unseen constraint that we as investors have to start realizing. The U.S. doesn't get to do what it wants. There are allies that are going to be very difficult to wrangle on this issue. Now, at 16 nanometer level, at AI chip level, maybe they'll play along. But if the US keeps pushing the boundaries, they will start getting pushback from the Netherlands, from Japan, from South Korea, their own geopolitical allies. So maybe at this level there's unanimity, but it's going to start to fray. And actually some great reporting by Bloomberg. There was an article 2 days ago by your team, Eric, basically, saying this. The article details all the different unnamed officials from the Netherlands, from Japan, from South Korea, complaining that this was a very unilateral extrajudicial decision by the U.S.
Yeah, I would add that, so totally agree that in terms of the geopolitical nature where this fits, also agree that this is not an existential threat to China. Again, the revenue that this impacts is actually just too small. In fact, if you look at the folks in China that are trying to replicate NVIDIA, so the people designing GPUs, they're all using an ARM core. There's not a single native core in China that's received enough financing to get to tape out of the chips. So that means you're by definition 5, 7, 8 years behind in terms of what the core needs to be to even build your own graphics processor unit. So if China pushes back, the next pushback is, no, you don't get access to any of this. And then you get into some more existential level type of conversations. One thing, if I change this though to EVs, because that's an area where the West is really going to get its ass kicked. When you look at, right now, 60% of exports are Chinese firms, 60%, or I mean, 60% of the exports are Chinese EVs of Chinese native brands. You really have to think hard what that means. These are $10,000, $15,000 cars. Automobile industry always drives middle-class economics in almost every place it goes. This is a big deal. There is nothing in the United States, nothing to compete with what China's going to be able to do at the entry level of the EV market. And those dollars are going to matter a great deal.
Well, let me respond a little bit there because my thesis has been called into question. I actually don't disagree with you in the sense that I don't think there's an existential threat to China necessarily, but I think it'll certainly be perceived as an existential threat to the chip industry. But when I say existential, let me give you an example of what I mean and what is not being discussed in DC by U.S. policymakers in relation to this. So China's facing an aging population crisis right now. As I'm sure everyone in this room is aware, by the year 2040, something like 35% of the population is going to be over the age of 65, right? And the average age of the Chinese farmer, I think 60% of Chinese farmers are over the age of 45. And you have very few youth coming into the profession, right? So what you're basically dealing with is a situation where in the next 20 years, you're going to have a huge percentage of the farming population age out. And China doesn't really have an immigration policy to speak of to replace those workers. So what a lot of the agricultural policies say, and what a lot of the agricultural smart tech policies say is, we need AI to make our agriculture more efficient. We need to be, able to predict weather patterns. We need to be able to generate smart seeds, right, and drought-resistant seeds and all this kind of stuff. When you take away the ability to do that or reduce the ability to do that, I think that kind of issue is much broader than military use, right? Semiconductors are not just a military technology, as we know. Many of the applications are consumer-facing and have to do with food security and have to do with the climate crisis. So when you have the Biden administration say something like, hey, look, we want to work with you on climate, we want to work with you on food security, but we want to compete with you robustly on AI, that comes across as disingenuous, and this is the reason why.
Ulrike, I want to tap into your knowledge for just a second here, because what Kendra is talking about and what Xi Jinping referenced in his address to the Chinese Communist Party Congress necessitates that if China wants to catch up to the West, let's call it, the US-based semiconductor technology, it's going to have to make some huge advances. Why is chip making so devilishly hard to master, and can China catch up?
Yeah, maybe just one quick point to what Kendra was saying, because I think it's a really important question. I feel like we need probably something like a nuclear, the equivalent of a nuclear non-proliferation agreement for AI.
Yeah,
we're saying, this is an AI confinement treaty here. We want to work together for civilian purposes and to solve these really important global issues that have all been discussed here at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum. But now to your question, why is it so hard? If you want to compete in the leading edge of chips, you need what's called EUV lithography. And what that is what EUV does is using tiny wavelengths of lights to imprint patterns on chips through a very complex system of mirrors. And there's really only one company in the world that has succeeded in doing that, which is ASML in the Netherlands. And it's taken them 35 years of research. The machines have over 100,000 parts that are sourced from 4,700 suppliers, with many of whom ASML has very tight, exclusive relationships very often. And the precision is such, Eric, that of the optical precision is such that if you were thinking that there's an astronaut on the moon now shooting a laser, it would precisely hit my fingertip. So in order to get to that level of engineering ingenuity, you need to lever the best of talent, the best of materials and processes globally. And I think that's very hard to do within the confines of autarky.
I've heard various views on this, but they sort of fall into three camps, that it'll take 10 years, 20 years, and possibly never for China to catch up. Do we have a view on that?
I would have said that before these sanctions, they were in the 7 to 10 range. But again, not across the board. There are 11 steps in semiconductor manufacturing. The Chinese are actually at world class in two. One is around the end and the packaging side. And that actually is why Intel got out of the semiconductor business back in the 80s, that its packaging technology was so poor that the Japanese just destroyed them on a cost basis. So Intel gave up memory and they focused on microprocessors. That's kind of what the entire U.S. industry has wound up doing, is moving up the food chain. So I would look at this as the actions that have been taken are a two-generation type of action, meaning if you think that these things are 5-year cycles for semiconductor technology moving from one set of nanometer technologies to another, then I think it is about a 10-year period of time.
Nodding, everybody? Difference of opinion?
I mean, it's just really hard to see a path forward because the hardware is so, the hardware path has been closed, right? And my understanding is it took ASML 25 years to develop those machines. China's not there yet, and if they can't get the components to even begin, that's a question. What that leads to is whether or not China can develop software that allows AI to run on older technology, on lesser chips. Yeah.
Marco, you mentioned earlier that taking a tough stance on China is politically popular in the United States. It is one of the precious few issues on which Republicans and Democrats generally agree. But in the world of business and finance, there is no such unanimity. You may recall, folks, that Ken Griffin was up here on stage a couple of days ago. He's the founder and CEO of Citadel, hedge fund and market-making firm. And he said that a policy of cutting China off from advanced technology will be disastrous economically and geopolitically for the United States. He said that it would inspire President Xi to undertake the chip equivalent of the Manhattan Project, to pour all the scientific and advanced computing resources that China has, the millions of STEM graduates that it churns out every year, into solving this problem. And he thought it might take 3 to 7 years. And if China were successful, that it would bifurcate the global tech stack, and the United States and its allies would supply equipment to themselves effectively, and China would supply Latin America and Africa and possibly India, in other words, the fastest growing and fastest developing and most economically attractive parts of the world.
What I would just say is that linear extrapolation never works in forecasting. And Kendra's point is very interesting to me. I didn't think of this, but they have slower chips. Maybe their software will have to get better. They'll do more with less. Look, industrial revolutions started in England. Why? Because they ran out of wood. The rest of the world was looking at England saying like, oh, look at you, haha, you're going to have to get dirty with coal. That's really terrible because you have to go find it, it's heavy, dig it. We go outside of our house, cut a tree, we got energy. But that insufficiency, that lack of something led to the United Kingdom, England at the time, developing canals, steam engine, boom, industrial revolution. So I think that, linear extrapolation is very difficult, and we may all say 10 years, 20 years. I have no idea. I don't know what the years is. Maybe it's never. China will never develop advanced semiconductors, and so what? They can invent fusion. If the Chinese invent fusion, if they've discovered it before us, we're all speaking Mandarin in 20 years. So I'm just saying, I think that we're overly focused on semiconductors as if having advanced semiconductors makes you a world power. Again, I have to bring up Germany yet again for the 15th time. Germany cannot produce a single advanced semiconductor, and they can still invade you and win. So I think that it's a misplaced focus in some way. I think we're overly obsessed with advanced semiconductors.
For better or for worse, I'm going to remain obsessed for our last two questions. I want to finish off by busting a couple of myths. We'll begin with this one. that all China needs to do to catch the West in chip technology is invade Taiwan. Who wants to take that one on?
I mean, that's
Gary.
ridiculous. Yeah, go ahead, Gary. That's my take.
Well, the Taiwanese government has even come out and said, TSMC has come out and said that, China invades Taiwan. 60% of senior TSMC executives are Americans, so they're gone. All the people maintaining every piece of advanced equipment in Taiwan are foreigners. They're gone. So you wind up with a bunch of very, very beautiful, expensive equipment that no one knows how to run.
And we should add, and maybe explain, TSMC is the premier semiconductor manufacturer in the world, has mastered the sophisticated processes, Ulrike, that you were describing better than any other company on the planet. And on which so many producers, including Apple, are totally reliant.
This is like, that logic reminds me of like medieval Europe. You take my castle, I take yours. It doesn't work like that. I mean, it's more complicated than this. Like, semiconductors don't grow on trees in a particular Taiwanese climate.
Yeah, and and particularly to that point, I think, for anybody in the room who hasn't heard this, TSMC has been called Taiwan's silicon shield. The idea being that if China invades Taiwan, the potential is that TSMC gets blown up and China won't be able to make chips anymore. I haven't heard any U.S. policymakers address the fact that if they do succeed in completely locking China out of the chip industry, and there is no reason anymore to manufacture chips in Taiwan, does that not remove the silicon shield? And so I think that's something we need to hear more discussion about.
An important point. And this is the second myth I want to bust to finish off, that it's just as easy for America to wean itself off of dependence on Taiwan and South Korea now that the Biden administration has passed the CHIPS Act and earmarked $53 billion in subsidies for chip making. Fabs are just going to spring up all over America and be just as good as TSMC and Samsung.
I mean, I can't get a cup of coffee in America because there's not enough people working in coffee shops. And we're supposed to build all these fabs, and all these sophisticated engineers are going to show up out of where? So like there's a labor shortage in the US. I mean, if you look at people working in semiconductors, it's collapsed since the 90s in the United States. So like good luck with the CHIPS Act. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, it's going to take time. I think the plans right now are for TSMC to obviously increase their founder business in the US, but even if you look at the plans for the end of this year, early next year, it's not even 5% of the overall TSMC capacity in Taiwan. So we're talking about a long period of time for self-sufficiency.
Yeah, I was working with Philip Wong on the U.S. Semiconductor Working Group that led to parts of the CHIP Act. And the thing that he said that really struck me, I'd never heard anyone say this before, is the U.S. idea is that you build the facility, those people go away, you install the equipment, those people go away, and then you have people come in, the engineers to run the fab. He goes, that's not what TSMC does. The people that put the plumbing in place, the people that poured the concrete, the people that put up the sheetrock, they stay with that fab for a decade. They said when you're looking at 3 nanometer lower technology, these really cutting edge technologies, that entire team needs to be in place for a decade. So it is just totally orthogonal to how Americans have thought about building fabs. So if we want to be in that business, we're going to have to fundamentally change. And the shortage won't be engineers. The shortage will be the plumbers in Ohio to build the damn pipes.
So maybe the American plan is for China to invade Taiwan, and then the Taiwanese move to America.
I may be overly obsessed with semiconductors, but for better or for worse, ladies and gentlemen, these are the geopolitics of technology. Please join me in thanking my panelists.
Thanks.